And so I've spent the past, yeah, like 7 years now building that documentary site up and mainly just shooting stories. I'll shoot a few one-off assignments. Like I think you guys looked at election imagery. In some of those, it was originally shot for a large story, but they were also one-off shot in between. But I don't do a lot of, oh, go shoot breaking news for the day. Um, that's sort of a different realm. And I also saw another question was, what do you focus on? And so I'd say my focus is more on documentary and stories. And it's pretty much long term and long form because it takes a while to get a story. A story isn't anything that you can go into and pull off in 2 days. And if you do, you do it out of luck because it takes time to meet and have them be comfortable with you. Usually the first day I don't get anything. And sometimes I don't even shoot when I'm meeting new people because you're trying to gain their trust and get in and find those intimate moments that you don't just get until somebody's comfortable with you and aren't paying attention to you. Sort of like if you're photographing your friends, it's pretty easy because they're not paying attention to your camera, they're used to you. So I'd say that's my path. And everybody has a different path. Like you're going to meet so many photographers and they're all going to come from different realms of the world. Some won't have gone to photo school. Some will and have left the photo industry and then have come back. I mean, they're going to come from all over the place. So I don't think there's a right or wrong path. It's just what you want to make it. So let's look through, I think you guys looked through two stories. And I'm going to show you two very different ones. And ones that the amount of time I had to work on both were very different. So Lukemir, I was sent to Bosnia about 2 years ago for a month to work on the refugee crisis that started happening again. And while I was there, I discovered there is a town, which if you read the text, high up in the mountains called Lukemir. So when I took a break from working on the refugee crisis for my own mental health, I went to Lukemir because I wanted to document and just see what I could get out of this town. So when I went, it's tiny. So I spent about a week here and it's literally, you can see here, it is small. You can count the houses. So this was a story where in a week I was able to get something small out of it. And it's a fascinating place. And this was one where I was not originally sent to shoot this, or I didn't have an agenda when I went here. I was doing it for my own personal growth. And then I ended up pitching it to somebody once I went and knew I could pull something out of it. And it became a published story. And not everything you shoot will be published if it's a personal project you work on. I have plenty that have not been published. And there's actually a new Instagram account. It's called Photo Unseen. A friend of mine started it, and it's going to be featuring photo projects that various photographers have worked on that never saw the light of day for whatever reason. You could be sent somewhere and the story just gets pulled. Or it could be a personal project you worked on, but it just never got that momentum to go anywhere. And so it's interesting. So you can look through these. I think you all kind of looked through them, right? So of course I shot a lot more, but this ended up being the final edit. And what we can do is I can show you and talk, and then we can go back and you guys can ask questions and we can sort of discuss. So this photo, and one of the things I've discovered in my career is there's a couple different types of photographers. There's those who just take pictures, and then there's those who make pictures. And it was once I realized that, it was a real breaking point for me to realize, don't just shoot anything you see, like take the time to think about what you want from the frame. So for this, I wanted the sheep going out during the day, coming across the edge of the mountain. So this photo probably took me 5 different tries and probably a total of 4 hours to get. Like just waiting and waiting, or the first time I shot it, there weren't a lot of sheep. So I went back and I waited till I saw all the sheep and it got to be what I wanted. And so I'd say that's something that's important because you could go, I could have gone, I could have just shot it, had what was still probably beautiful with the mountains in the background, but to me, it just wasn't there. Like the sheep weren't filling the frame. Maybe there were only a couple, or somebody else ran through the frame. And I mean, it probably would have worked, but to me, it wouldn't have been the best photo. So if you can always set out to get the best photo, I mean, you won't always be able to, of course, if it's breaking news and you're shooting something and you only have a second, you're going to get what you can get. But when you're somewhere and if you're working on something and you have time, think about making the frame and how you can frame something to be the best in your mind. It makes a difference. This was another one. I spent about a couple hours with this woman, and I love the way she looked, and I was just trying to get her in a different way. And I have other photos that I also like. I did some of her sitting in the chair. This is her family, and these are all religious elements, which is very interesting, especially in Bosnia, because religion plays a large role still, and it's very divided still, even after a genocide. So there was just something about when she just went to randomly answer the phone, the way she just put her foot up and the way her skirt fell, thought this is way better than her just sitting there like she was doing a natural movement. You know, I don't think you need to see her face. It's more about like the feeling that this is Lukemir. It's set back in time. And detail shots are important, really important. They can help, and I'm sure Martin's talked about this, they can help bridge a story. When you're putting something into a layout, it can help like give that breathing room. For instance, like there's her, and say I had put as my layout online, him next. It would have been a lot to look at. Like if I had done him next and then say like this one next, that would have been a lot to take in. So instead you can do these sort of moments that let you just pause. And you're like, oh, it's simple. It tells you a lot. You can see a family. The photos are old. And then you can go to another one. Like, oh, there's more to it. Like you're looking at somebody, their environment. That's just something to keep in mind when you're presenting your work in portfolio reviews or online, anywhere.
That's a really good articulation of the utility of a detail picture. And I'm definitely going to work that in. We do talk about detail pictures. As you point out, they're often forgotten about, or disregarded, or people are so busy concentrating on the elaborate layered moments and the high art that that they forget to shoot the details. But yeah, it just, if nothing else, it just gives you, those bridge pictures are more important, or maybe not as important as the key pictures, but they're really important to have in there, or they're really missed when they're not.
They are missed. And when you start shooting assignments, if you were to turn something in and you don't have any of those photos, it's going to be an issue for an editor when they're trying to put photos together, even if they're trying only to put 3 photos together. Like say you went and shot a couple days around whatever city you live in for the coronavirus. If you only shot masked people, and it depends what somebody asked you for, but if you just shot masked people at the same distance, it's going to be very hard to run those together because it's going to become redundant. Whereas if you shot a masked person from a distance and then you just happen to see a mask on the ground or hanging on a bench, shoot that. And then something else. So that way it's more of a story. You're telling something instead of just looking at something. Like this, like the minute I saw this, to me, I was like, I shot this, but this is in the guy's house, this man. So you can kind of see where part of it was. It's here. And so he grew his own tea. And it was awful. I had to drink it. And they're chamomile flowers. And the minute I saw that, I wanted to photograph that before I even wanted to photograph him, because it was just the light, the way, how old these placemats are, the flowers, how it curled up. Like that's just what I instantly saw. And then eventually he sat over here, he was talking. I think he was getting bored with me. And so he was more just hanging out. And that's when I photographed him. So I set out to photograph him, but I didn't set out to photograph him in his house. So it was interesting. He invited me in for the tea. We were talking about tea, and that's when he just sat down, and that's when I photographed him here. But it was originally the detail shot. And this is another one. This was luck. I just happened to be there photographing them and have a sheep jump. There's nothing I could have done to plan that. And that will happen. You'll get really lucky. And it's nice.
Yeah, but you have to be ready for that luck.
You do. That's the thing. You'll start to learn to move quick, and you'll start to also know when things are going to happen. You'll like, the more you become aware of situations and situational awareness and always just looking around. Like I was talking, or not, I wasn't talking. There were people talking to them who helped her, just waiting around like, okay, what's going to happen? They're bringing them in. They were about to vaccinate the new babies. And I was sort of just waiting around to see what happened and photographing them, herding them in. And it was working, and then all of a sudden I saw them, all the sheep start to get frantic. And I'm like, okay, what's going to happen? And I just waited a few minutes. And then before I knew it, like this guy jumped, some ran this way, and it became mayhem. And so you'll start to learn like when things will change and your instinct behind, okay, should I be ready for a photo? Should I not? And you're gonna, in the beginning, you're gonna miss so many photos. And I still miss so many photos, and it's okay. But it will teach you, hold on, I could have been ready for that. How do I be ready next time? So when you miss those photos, don't be upset. I still tell myself that every day. And as years go on, you'll miss fewer and fewer. And then these photos are important too. The like bridge photos ones that they just let you like breathe between looking at something and give your eyes a break. Because you can only look at so many busy or photos that are giving you so much information for so long before your brain is overpowered. Okay, and that was, hold on, let's see. How do I, sorry, there's so many little things open. So we can go back, or Martin, what do you think? Do you think they should ask questions about this one now, or do you think we should look at another one and just do questions at the end?
Sometimes it's good just to pause for questions every once in a while and just kind of keep people engaged, and also just yeah, they may have seen something that has questions there.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
So when you were working on this project, did you hire like a fixer, or did you know some of the language? Like,
That's a good question.
That's where
I dragged a friend with me because no, I don't speak Bosnian whatsoever. And so it's actually a really good question. I brought a friend from Sarajevo, and they're in the photo world. And I was like, hey, we want to go to Lukamir. And they didn't stay the whole time with me. But they stayed. I had convinced them to stay most of the time. They hadn't been there in a while and they didn't have anything going on. So I'm like, come on, come hang out in Lukamir. I want to explore Lukamir. And like I said, I wasn't being sent to Lukamir. So I was able to say to them, like, I just want to see Lukamir. I've never been. And so they were like, okay, yeah, let's go to Lukamir. And it's very hard to get to. I didn't mention that. So I couldn't have gotten here without someone who was Bosnian. Like you were traversing to get here in a 4-wheel drive vehicle, which I didn't know, over all this type of, over all this type of rock and boulders for miles. It was
were landmines a problem there?
No.
So I've worked in Bosnia.
Yeah, not over here. The war didn't go anywhere near Lukamir because it was so unstrategic. They ignored it.
Wow.
So, yeah, so I needed someone to get me there, number one. And then, yeah, I did not speak the language, but a lot of it, and I've been in situations where I haven't spoken the language and I don't have someone. It's amazing what you can do in a pinch through random translation apps nowadays, or just like hand motions. Like it's when you're really put on the spot, it's interesting how you come up with weird ideas of things. But luckily here, I was able to have him for a few days to translate. And it also helped that he was Bosnian and not just someone who spoke the language. But but that he grew up there, he lived through the war, that he experienced Bosnian life his whole life. So I think that he was able to relate to these people a little bit. But they weren't the most, this guy was super talkative. She was very standoffish. It took her a while to warm up. And there's not many people in this town at all. The people with the sheep, they were fine, but they live in an isolated bubble. They don't leave here. They have no technology, so they're back in time.
I was just about to ask, because I read your like little summary at the top, that there's about like 20 people that live there, and I was just gonna ask like how like was it hard to like get people to talk just because like they are more standoffish just because like they're trying to separate themselves from like everything else happening in their country. Like, did you find it difficult to like find people open to talk to you, or like did you make them
Yes
understand
and
that you're
no.
telling your story?
Yeah, yes and no. I didn't give up. I like this guy was very friendly from the beginning. This woman on the phone was not. It took a couple days for me to be able to then spend time with her. But it's one of those things when someone sees you, and this is also why time is so important, because it's really unfortunate when photographers go somewhere to anywhere. And this isn't a sad story. This is a normal story. Like these people aren't suffering. They're choosing to live the life. Like they could leave, all their families have left for the city and would love them to come, but they don't want to go. And they're living fine lives here. And it's one of the things is you always need time, because the more you go somewhere and you stay, people respect that. And they're like, oh, this person isn't leaving. But when you go somewhere and you're there for a day, like say a refugee crisis, you go and you spend a day at a camp. People find it degrading. They're like, oh, you came here to take photos, to make money off me, and then you leave and you go back to your nice life. And they're not necessarily wrong per se. But if you can stay and spend time, you will gain so much more respect from the people you're photographing, because they see that, oh, you're not going anywhere. You're here. You're going to put this effort into it. So that always helps. Because I was in Bosnia on the border of Croatia for weeks and photographing the new route that the refugees were taking, and they were stranded and they were living in an old building. It was like an old dormitory that was blown out from the war. And it took days for them to warm up to me. Like at first, some were nice, but a lot were not. Like they were just like, you should leave. Why are you here? And then they realized you're not, and one person said to me, oh, you're not going anywhere, huh? And I was like, no. And so once they see you're there and you're putting your own time in, it's nice. But I understand not every person has that time nowadays. Not every magazine, newspaper has a budget to send somebody somewhere and spend that time. So that's another issue. But that's an industry-wide issue, not necessarily a photographer issue. So you kind of have to balance that.
That's a really important point, and it's a point of criticism, really about a lot of Western coverage. That the Western coverage, and frankly, it's rewarded by the awards culture and what is considered, prestige photojournalism. But for whatever reason, it seems to kind of cater to this kind of parachute in, parachute out, and kind of a colonial ethos of just almost kind of exploitation. So to the extent that you can show respect, put in the necessary time to tell these people's stories in an authentic way, again, that's I cannot that can't be overstated.
No, and it's worth it. Say, I don't know, if you're working on a personal project, you go somewhere, spend the time. You will get better photos. You will get more intimate moments that matter. And if I've done this too, if someone is sending me somewhere on a story and say they're like, okay, can you go for a week or 2 weeks here, do whatever. Sometimes just for me, I'll stay longer if I'm like, oh, wow, I could keep getting more and it's not expensive, or there's like somehow, like money to stay, I will always push for it because you will end up with better photos. The first, anywhere you go that's a new place, and if you've never been, this is also important, you're overstimulated the first time you get somewhere, and you can make okay photos, but you're making photos that after you've been there a week, you wouldn't make. Like Cuba is an awesome example of this. People go to Cuba and they photograph the old cars. You know how tired people are seeing these old cars? And it's one of the first things you see because you go and you're like, oh my God, these are so cool. They are cool. But don't photograph the old cars. Like go into the neighborhoods, find the people. That's the real story. And after you've been there for a week or 2 weeks, or you've been there 3 times, you're going to stop photographing the cars. And then you're going to start looking into the real Cuba. And if you kind of have that in mind when you go somewhere, that the first couple days, look at everything, get it out of your system, and then start taking the real photos.
What is like probably like the longest you stayed in like a community like this? And then where do you stay? Like you said, like you can count the houses, like you stay in that community or like an outside community?
Lukamere is an interesting situation. There is no outside community. Like you are hours from anything besides this little huddle. So there is a guest house at Lukamere that a family runs because very few tourists will try to come to Lukamere apparently. And so I stayed there. I was the only one. And I'm sure people maybe in the summer come up here. I don't know why people would come here. There is nothing to do. Unless they just want to see a different part of Bosnia. But I have no idea why somebody would come here. But there is a guest house. So I stayed there. But so a good example was when I was on the Croatian border, I needed to be near where the refugees were. And so I didn't want to have to rely on cars. And at the time, getting around Bosnia was still difficult. So the trains opened back up while I was there. But otherwise, there were no trains going through the country since the war. So getting around is hard. You can rent a car, but that's incredibly expensive. So I found an Airbnb has been amazing. So I found an Airbnb near where on Google, like I looked on Google Maps where I had to be, where I would be photographing and spending weeks. So I found an Airbnb that was near there. And I mean, for budget, it was very inexpensive. And that's usually how things are where I go. It's usually a weird situation and not a fancy hotel or anything like that. So I did that. And it worked amazing. I could walk to where I had to be. I didn't have to rely on anyone driving me or having a car, dealing with where do you park a car? That's another issue. There was nowhere to park one near where these people were. So you kind of have to be strategic about things. And you'll learn it if you do a lot of international work, which I do. You kind of learn how to go in, pull something off and leave and come back with something successful.
I have a really funny quick story about staying in the Hotel Tuzla when I
You were the Tuzla?
Yeah, I was in the Hotel Tuzla, and it was right after the Bosnian conflict, and it was in February.
Cool.
So these pictures look downright balmy compared to what I experienced in Bosnia when I was there. It spent most of the time below freezing, and I was in full parka and Arctic, not Arctic, but I mean really heavy cold weather gear. And what we didn't know is that they were on energy rationing. I don't know if they did that when you were there still, but they turned off the power in the hotel, including the heat. So I woke up and checked my watch and picked up my watch, and it had frost on it in the morning. And I called down to the front desk and I said, "Hi, it seems kind of cold up here." And he goes, "I'm sorry, third Tuesday." It's third Tuesday. Like third Tuesday, and apparently every third Tuesday they turn off the power in that part of Tuzla, that part of the grid. So we were there at the right time, or in this case, the wrong time.
Yeah, so you can't get to Lukamere in the winter because it's in the mountains. There's no way to drive a vehicle. So you can, once the people are here in the winter, they are there to stay. So That's another thing. So there's no going here in the winter. You guys have any other questions on Leukomere? Or then we can look at a big story I recently did.
Let's go ahead and take a look at that.
Yeah. So I am not a political photographer. This has been the past year. So I worked on this story for about 11 months. And it was about the state of New Hampshire during the political election, and mainly the primary season, since it is the first in the nation primary. Technically, Iowa is first, but they have a caucus, not a primary. So New Hampshire wins as the first primary. So what happens in the state, I'd say since last February, it's about a year before the primary, the candidates start trying to gain support in the state, visiting the state, and they come constantly. And so the state sort of gets turned around. So everything was shot here knowing it was going to be for a story, but they're also, one of the interesting things about this is there were so many times I would go and photograph and get nothing. So that's the nice part of having a year to work on something, because I can't tell, like, it's not like if spent every time I photographed an event that I walked away with something. There were so many times I did not walk away with something. So just so you know, you don't always win. So earlier I talked about taking a photo and making a photo. So I waited. I saw as I was photographing this event, that when I stood at one area, I was able to finally, and I wanted for a long time to get Biden in one of these. And so I waited for him to be looking and having like the right facial expression. So that was just another one where I could have taken one, and I don't even think any other photographer here even noticed that he kept lining up with this because no one else took one. And that's another thing about political photography. There's always a bunch of other photographers. So you always have to keep in mind the mass media that's everywhere. And it makes it a little more difficult than if you're the only photographer around. We can look through. And when shooting political photography, you don't always have to show the candidate. You don't always have to be so obvious about what you're showing. You can sort of make the viewer think. Like, what are they looking at? Why are they looking at it? And one thing that was nice about doing this, I'm not a political photographer, even though I did live in DC for 11 years before I moved to Boston, is it was a nice learning curve for me to shoot something that I don't normally shoot. And I'd say like the first month I was shooting this, I don't even know if anything is in here from the first month. Like it was kind of a wake up call to be like, oh, wow, I can learn something new. I can do something different, but still do it my own way, not like a typical wire political way. So this was a really, like, for me, this was a really fun project. I enjoyed it a lot. I can't wait for the next election so I can do it again. And there'll actually be Republicans running. And the nice thing too, when you have something to work on for so long, and it's not constant where you're doing other things as well, it's nice. You work on it, you may take a week or 2-week break or month, whatever, in between other assignments, and then you work on it again. And so it's nice. And I would encourage all of you to have some sort of personal project, especially now, like being fresh out of school when you're done, that you can do that with. And usually it's easiest to have something in your own area. So that way, if it is like a personal project as it would be now, it's not costing you a lot of money. You're able to do it when you want. You can come and go. But it's nice because you'll learn as you're doing things that, hey, maybe your vision of what it started out is changes. And I saw one of you had a question about Vermin Supreme. That was funny.
That was me.
What was your question about him again?
So I just wanted to know because I saw him in the last election and I just saw he was a really wacky looking guy and he
It's
was
all an act.
one of the libertarian candidates, right?
Yeah.
I just wanted to know what your experience was with him, however big or small it was, because he's just so interesting.
He is, but it's an act. It's a theater. He's not serious. And it's a game to him and he knows it. And don't think that like, oh, he's a serious candidate and like it's a game to him and it's an act. And he'll tell you that. Like for him, he's putting on a show and he's doing it to tell the other on purpose to sort of show face to the other candidates. Like, hey, you're being serious, you're running. Well, I'm a show and I'm running. So what does that say about American politics? He's entertaining. So this was another photo. I was photographing Warren and at this particular event, and there was the giant flag, and she kept pacing in front of the flag. So I waited for like 30 minutes to get her, and we're also shooting this, and I kept sitting in the one spot, and I wanted her to walk and line up where she lined up. She happened to put her hand up, and at that time, and I was lucky, but I was trying to get her there, but she kept moving too fast. And I mean, one of my good friends, he came over, he's like, are you gonna move? Are you gonna get up? I'm like, no. I was like, I'm trying to get something. And I waited and eventually she paused. And I mean, I guess it would have been sad if I waited and she never slowed down near that point, but I was willing to lose that. I had gotten all what I had to get out of this event for it to be published that day. But then knowing for this story, I just in general, I wanted something better. So I waited and she eventually got to where I wanted her, but it took a good half hour. And I don't know if you go to political things, they only speak for about 45 minutes. So it was tricky, but if you see something and you know it will work and you wait, it's worth it. Here's your Indiana guy. So this is what you'll deal with in politics towards the end of the year. In the beginning of a season, it's quiet, but then it becomes insane. And I say try to be different. Like try not to take the same photo everyone else takes. Like, you know, like that photo is there. Like try to do something different that's more unique. And don't worry about failing when trying to do that because you'll learn.
This is really a great edit, by the way.
It's a little too big. So now that I'm in the country and have all this, I wasn't supposed to be in the country the next couple of weeks, but now that I'm here, and I have all this time on my hands, I am going to edit this down, and then I'm also going to edit a couple other things and put them online. But I feel like it's a few too many. But and I also need to add some stuff to this, although it's a different story. So this was meant to be photographed like leading up to the primary. And then I did photograph the primary week, but that's a little different. So I have to figure out a way to edit that and get that online. Because it is different than like they can't really be together. So that's something I have to figure out. And like I said, details, they can be funny like this one, or I think this is funny. But they're so important. Like there's none of Trump in this edit. I have to add him.
We were talking about your experiences photographing Trump events. I didn't know if you wanted to share anything about that.
It's fine. He talks for a very long time, so it gets really boring. I haven't photographed a ton. I photographed a few. I mean, you're never super close. Like you need a long lens. They're very organized. Like you'll go and to a rally, and like of course, like Secret Service checks everything like normal. That's easy though. And then you're usually allowed, depending where the rally is, you're usually allowed to photograph around anywhere in the rally. I'd say usually until about half an hour to an hour before he arrives. And then once he arrives, you're stuck in the media fenced off area. And I mean, there's no real photos to be made there except the typical ones, you know, like you'll photograph Trump, and then, I mean, you can kind of get people in the audience, but you're not super close. You're in a weird spot, so they're weird. The only way that you can get, I'd say, out of the media pen is if you're with his traveling pool. And then since you can pretty much, you should be able to wander a little bit more. But some are more interesting than others. It all depends on the area they're held in and like how many supporters he has there. If it's a Republican state versus a Democratic state. The New Hampshire, the latest New Hampshire one, he held one the night before the primary. That was an interesting one, but it was also very interesting because it was the first one he held since he was acquitted. And it was his largest one he held to date. There was about 11,000 people. It was massive. He spoke for about an hour straight. And while he's speaking, I mean, you're taking the same photo over and over. So that's one where you're going to try to make something of it, right? Like he's not moving from where he is. He'll do different hand motions, different facial expressions, but you can kind of play with who's behind him, how are they, and stuff like that, and kind of get some fun, silly, weird photos instead of just your typical Trump photo, which is fun. I haven't added any of him yet to here.
So, who are some of the visual storytellers that you look to for inspiration or look at work that kind of maybe as a student you've looked up to, but like who do you look up to now?
That's a good question. There's so many. Instagram, it's very interesting this day with social media, because when I was in school, like we didn't have Instagram, or even fresh out of school to look at stuff. Like I would look through books. So with Instagram now, there's a lot of, I'd say, inspiration you can find, but be careful because there's also a lot of bad photography on Instagram. But I'd say as for political work, there's quite a few. There's a Getty photographer, Drew Angerer, whose work I really like. There's Evan Vucci. He's an AP photographer. I really like his work. He's always he's staff with AP, and he basically just covers the White House and Trump. So he's part of the traveling pool always. So that's how he's getting the shots he's getting. Because you're probably wondering how people get stuff and access. So it really depends who you're shooting for, the access you'll get. So, I mean, you can look at something and be like, oh my God, that's an amazing photo. But it's not like really that amazing. You're just like, oh wow, they got something that you hadn't seen because they had the access. So keep that in mind. Like access is key. Access will make or break what you want to shoot. And you're not always going to get access, but when you can get it, take it and do as much as you can with it. Who else? Natalie Keysar is a really great photographer and a friend. I could email a list. It kind of just depends what you all are interested in, because there's so many, I mean, there's so many photographers that you could just find, especially internationally. Kiana Ayeri in Afghanistan, I think, is an incredible photographer. And same with Andrew Quilty. He's Australian, but I think he's back in Afghanistan now. Yeah, there's so many.
What are some of your like short-term and long-term goals as like a photographer, or like based off of projects you're working on now? Like, what kind of are you striving for
To finish
or
them.
see that you?
Long-term goals to be able to keep doing what I'm doing because this is a weird industry. And I don't know where it will be to. So long-term it's interesting. Short, I'm working on a project in Venezuela that is taking a lot of my mental capacity. So I would love to finish that in the next, what are we, month? But now I don't know if that will be finished by June with this whole coronavirus. I'm trying to think, I don't know what else, I'm trying to think short term, what I'm trying to. I do want to shoot more in the United States. That has been a goal of mine. So I have been working like with editors trying to shoot more here versus being sent abroad. I'm finally interested in what's happening in this country. And I really do want to photograph it. I think it's a very interesting time in America. The whole world, but especially in America. But this virus has really thrown a lot of things haywire. And I think it's changed a lot of photographers' plans and what will happen. And even if
I did have a question as far as kind of dealing with this new normal that we have for the next however many weeks or months or whatnot. How has that kind of affected you kind of moving forward with projects and really just having to social distance in a field where social distance isn't really helpful?
So I was supposed to be back in Venezuela next week, shooting, but obviously that's not happening because they've closed the country, and I don't want to go to Venezuela when there's a health crisis that could very highly affect me because it's not a place you want to be. So it's affected that, and it's going to make it difficult because I don't know when this will end and then when I can go back for visa purposes. It's not like they can say, okay, in a month we can switch visa dates. So it's sort of up in the air. I mean, obviously this isn't forever, but it does for certain deadlines or things. I'm sort of like, okay, don't quite know where that will go. And I'd say for stuff here, so I was focusing still on political stuff. Well, it sort of seems the election has taken a side rail to the virus and no one's really concentrating on it. So that's been interesting. Not really shooting any election stuff for the past 2 weeks. Yeah. And then in addition for social distancing, I'm out shooting. I've been shooting some virus stuff. So I'm social distancing maybe, or I'm not, but in a smart way. I have been washing my hands constantly and not really interacting with a lot of people unless they're other journalists who, I trust and if we're shooting something together, but I'm still not really, like if I see my friends, I'm not hugging them like, hey, stuff like that. I am spending more time at home and I'm starting to go crazy. But I also have a lot of like projects that that I've procrastinated so that I'm trying to finish. Like I would love to edit this down. I need to edit the primary week stuff. I just haven't had time for any of that. So I'm using this time to get all those things done. I bought some new books that I'm hoping to read. But then, I mean, the virus as a photographer, I mean, there'll be less work, but there's also going to be virus coverage. So I've been shooting around the city. People on the street, I'm trying not to get close to them. Especially in Boston, because there is a surge of cases here, a lot because of a conference that happened that everyone was infected at. But it's interesting because I just walked through my neighborhood and there's so many people outside walking around. I think people are so bored, but at the same time, it's weird because I'm like, you're not really 6 feet from each other or whatever. And I don't know if they'll lock the city down or what they'll do, but it's been interesting witnessing it. And I don't know, I mean, it's going to get worse for sure. I don't know how much worse and what will happen, but I'm just staying away to not get sick.
One of the probably the one remaining assignment that the students here have is, erstwhile, it had been, to do a passion project and would use the entire back half of the semester to work a passion project. That paradigm and dynamic has changed, as you probably would suspect. And the suggested approach is to do kind of find ways to document their personal experience with the crisis. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that. You are photographing the crisis, but you're actually doing assignment work. You'd said you'd photograph testing the other day. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, you won't get access to testing facilities or that type of stuff, but what you can remember, you can photograph on a public street. So if you can do whatever you want, like what's going to be very interesting, I don't know where you all live, but is how quiet cities start to become. Like San Francisco is quiet. More cities and towns are going to become like that. And that's something that you'll probably never see again, hopefully in your lifetime. So that, like, I would photograph that, like and just the difference in daily life, like just walk around. I mean, obviously be smart about it. Like don't really, if you're talking to someone in public, kind of keep your distance. You don't know where people have been. Like I don't get close to people or, I mean, I'm not walking around with a mask, but I'm not getting close to people and stuff like that because you don't know and you really don't want to get sick just covering it. So, but I would walk around. I mean, you don't have to shoot people. That's what's the most interesting right now. The photos I'm seeing that I'm really moved by are those that show a lack of people out and about. Yeah, that's rare to see in massive cities throughout the US.
Yeah, I live in Indianapolis. My name's in Indianapolis. Excited to go like home because that's what I want to do. I want to go down to the circle and like see if anybody's out there because I live like in downtown Indy. So it's just a walking distance to get down there. I'm excited to go see how quiet it looks.
Yeah, I don't know if it will be like, I don't know the state of Indiana or those cities, but eventually if they're not super quiet yet, they're gonna become quiet. So yeah, and like just like the difference, I don't know if you guys have had like your restaurants and bars shut down, but it's interesting. Like that's not normal. So and that's a hard thing to capture too without just taking a photo of the chairs up. So it can be kind of creative. I mean, I haven't been trying to get portraits of people. I don't really like want to talk to people to get portraits of them personally. If I see people on the street and they're interesting, I'll photograph them, but don't put yourself out there that you're trying to make a photo of someone and you don't know where they've been, or like I wouldn't let anyone like say, I don't know, you wanted someone's name for whatever reason. Like I wouldn't give them a pen and take it back. Like be careful because you really don't know where a stranger has been.
That's really good advice. I can tell you from personal one of the entertainment districts in Indianapolis is kind of where I live in Broad Ripple. It's pretty much a ghost town here.
Yeah, photograph it. I mean, because that's like about all you can do during this. Like, if you don't have an actual press pass and stuff gets locked down, then you're going to be confined at home. And I mean, access is tough. So, I mean, yeah. You can also photograph your family, how they react to it, which is probably interesting. Like if you live with your family, I'm sure their lives have changed